Welcome to Drive the Daf, clear, structured explanation of the daily daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Yoma Daf Samach Zayin begins with a Mishnah and ends just after the next Mishnah. The Mishnah, which begins the daf, discusses the procedure of the Sar Lazazel, the goat which is sent over the cliff, describes the steps that are involved. The Gemara comments on them with a few explanations in Machloksin. And then the next Mishnah takes us to the burning of the remnants of the par and the other sire, and the Gemara will discuss that briefly. So first of all, the Mishnah begins and it says that the person, the Ish'iti, who was taking the sire out to the wilderness, to the midbar, to push it over the cliff, so he was escorted by the Akira Yerushalayim, the Chashuv people, the precious ones of Yerushalayim, would walk with him. And it says that there were tents, there were sukkos set up along the way from Yerushalayim almost all the way to the cliff. The Mishnah says one number for how far it was and how many tents there were. The Gemara will quote a brisa that has other opinions, but the Mishnah says it was a distance of 12 mil, and there were 10 tents set up along the way. It was a length also, the 12 mil measured 90 ris, the Mishnah says. 12 divided by 90 is 7.5, so there were 7.5 ris per mil. Now, as he would arrive at each sukkah, they would tell him there's water, there's food here, you could take a drink, have something to eat. And then they would continue walking with him. There would be people in each sukkah who would walk him till the next sukkah, so that he wouldn't be alone in the midbar, he would be accompanied by them. The last one did not walk all the way with him. He stopped about a mil short of the cliff, and he would go on himself, and this person would stand the back a mil and watch what he was doing and how it worked. What did he do? So he tore the strip of Zahoris, the strip of red wool, in half. He tied half of it between the horns of the goat and another half onto a rock. And then he pushed the goat backwards. It fell off the cliff and fell down the cliffside, rolling to the bottom, and didn't get halfway down until it was torn limb from limb. Then the man would go back and he would go return to the last sukkah, and he would stay there until the sun set and Yom Kippur was over, until after the darkness and the end of the day. Now we know the halacha that the person who brings the goat Azazel becomes tamei, his clothing become tamei. When does that tumah take hold? We'll see a number of opinions that the Gemara will bring, but this Mishnah says that as soon as he leaves the walls of Yerushalayim, the Tanna Kama says is when he becomes tamei, and Rav Shimon says from when he pushes him off the cliff is when he becomes tamei. The Gemara will add some opinions. Okay, the Gemara begins with the brisa discussing what the distance was and how many sukkahs there were along the way. So as we'd seen, our Mishnah said that there were 10 sukkahs over 12 mil. That's the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says there were 9 sukkahs over 10 mil. Rabbi Yossi says there were 5 sukkahs over 10 mil. And what is the reason for these calculations? So you wanted people to accompany him along the way, but those people could not leave the tchum. The tchum is 1 mil. You can make yourself on one end of the tchum is 1 mil in each direction. It's a circle surrounding your spot, your place of residence, extending 1 mil in each direction. Now you could make yourself be on the end of the circle by making an eruv, and then you could have you're able to walk all the way to the other end of the circle. So you could walk up to a total of 2 mil. That's how much each person could walk. So the brisa and the opinions work out as follows. According to Rabbi Meir, each person could only walk 1 mil, and you wanted him to be accompanied all the way. So you had 12 mil divided up amongst 10 sukkahs works out very well, because the first mil he was accompanied by people who came from Yerushalayim. That got him to the first sukkah. And then by the time he got to the 10th sukkah, he had already gone at 10 mil. He then went 1 mil past the 10th sukkah with the person who was in the 10th sukkah to the end of his tchum. That was the 11th mil. And the last mil he went on his own, and as it says in the Mishnah, that's why there are 12 mil. That's Rabbi Meir's opinion. Now, Rabbi Yehuda says that there were 9 sukkos and 10 mil. Rashi does not explain how that calculation works out, but it works out to 1 mil per sukkah, assuming that they walked with him all the way to the end, counting the first mil as being walked by people who were in Yerushalayim itself. Now, the last opinion here, Rabbi Yossi says that there were 5 sukkos for 10 mil. That means that each sukkah was responsible for 2 mil, And the Gemara says that he said that they made an Erev. That means that they stood at the end of their circle. Each one made an Erev so that he could go 2 mil. So that way, 5 sukkos, he was able to be accompanied for a distance of 10 mil. So the Gemara says that Rabbi Yossi commented that his son, Elazar, said, look, if you're using an Erev, then you don't need to have 1 sukkah every 2 mil. You could have 1 sukkah every 4 mil. What's the reason? Because the people from 1 sukkah, there could be multiple people in 1 sukkah, and those people could come out to greet him as he was coming 2 mil before he arrived, walk with him till the sukkah, and then another person there could have his Erev Tchumen set up that he could go 2 mil past the sukkah. So through that calculation, you could actually have him go the full 10 mil with only 2 sukkahs. Yeah, it could actually be further than the 10 mil, but if you're using the 2 sukkah calculation, and if you're using the 10 mil distance, which Rabbi Yossi used, and you're using an Erev Chatzeros, Erev Tchumen, then you should be able to have just 2 sukkahs. How so? Let's say the people from Yerushalayim set up an Erev Chatzeros, an Erev Tchumen, that they could walk 2 mil out of Yerushalayim. So they would accompany him for the first 2 mil. There he would meet 2 people who came from the next sukkah, which was another 2 mil further. He would get to the next sukkah. So far he's gone 4 mil. That would be the first sukkah that he got to. Then 2 people from there who set up their Erev Tchumen to go another 2 mil past that would walk with him. Then he's gone 6 mil. There he would be meted by people from the second sukkah who had come out to greet him and set up an Erev Tchumen. Walk with them to the final sukkah. That would be 8 mil. And then the people in that mil could walk another 2 mil further than that, based on another Erev Tchumen that they had made. Therefore, they would be able to get him all the way to the end of the 10 mil. So now, the Gemara says that of these 3 opinions, who fits in the Brisa that says, like our Mishnah, that they didn't walk him the last mil he went on his own? Gemara says that's Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says there were 12 mil, but there was only 1 mil. There were only 10 sukkahs plus the people who left Yerushalayim, so they could only be walking him 11 mil, and the last mil he would be on his own. Okay, the Gemara continues. In each sukkah that he arrived at, they told him there's water and there's food here. The Gemara comments that he never had to eat. It never happened that he had to actually eat anything, even though because it was Yom Kippur. The reason they said that to him was the fact that he knew that water and food was available, gave him a sense of comfort, even though he wasn't going to eat it. Now, what did he do with the strip of wool? He tore it in half, and he tied 1 half in between the goat's horns and 1 half on the rock. I said, why do you have to split it in half? Why don't you just tie it all on the rock? Mar says he might be so busy staring at it to see if it turns white, and if it does turn white, he may forget all about the goat and not end up pushing it off the cliff, and therefore he wouldn't do the mitzvah fully. We don't want therefore to have it all on the rock. Mar says to have it all on the goat. He had it all on the goat. It may end up in a position with its head folded that you wouldn't be able to see. You wouldn't know whether it turned white or not. The Gemara now quotes a brisa as to the development of how this strip of wool came to be where it is. The Gemara says first, in the old days they would tie the strip of wool on the door of the ulam, the door of the entrance to the building of the Beis HaMikdash, on the outside, and people would watch it. And if it turned white, they'd be happy. If it didn't turn white, they would be sad. The turning white is a symbol of the kapara, the mechila, and all of Klal Yisrael's averos. And they would be sad and be embarrassed. So what did they do? Because people were becoming upset when it didn't turn white, they tied it on the inner door of the ulam, where people couldn't see. But they were still peeking, finding ways to see. And they were still having the same simcha when it turned white, and the same sadness and embarrassment when it turned red, when it stayed red. So therefore, they started tying it on the rock and on the horns. The Gemara now quotes of Nachum bar Papa, named Rabbi Elazar Kapar, says a similar thing. In the beginning, they tied it on the door of the ulam, and when the goat would get to the midbar, would get to the cliff, it would turn white, and then they would know that the mitzvah of Sar Lazaza was performed. Like it says in the pasuk, if your sins will be red, they will turn white like snow. Okay. Now, the Mishnah had said further that the goat became torn limb from limb. So what was the halach of those limbs? Were they usable for anything or not? Or were they asur b'ana like kachim? Where says Machlokes Rav and Shmuel? One says they were mutter, one says they were asur. What's the Machlokes based on? It's based on how to learn the psukim. The Torah uses an extra word, bamidbar. It says, Nasas Asel, Allah is called in a summer lairds Gezeira, Veshilach Asel Sa'ir Bamidbar. So the word Gezeira here and Midbar are redundant. If it's a land of Gezeira, then it's a Midbar, you don't have to say both of those. So the opinion that says that it is mutter says like Bamidbar, the extra word Bamidbar is to tell you that those limbs have the halach of the Midbar, just like the Midbar is hefker and open for anybody to use. These limbs are ownerless and available for everyone to use. Now the Gemara says, what does the other person do with the extra word midbar? He says, as a drasha, use the word midbar or hamidbara, bamidbar, uses 3 times to teach that this mitzvah of sending the Seir Azazel took place in all 3 locations of the Mikdash, Nov and Givon, Shiloh, and the permanent base of Mikdash in Yerushalayim. Now, what does the other one learn? How does he know that it's forbidden? His source is from the word Gzeira. Gzeira is like from the word Gzeira, restricted, forbidden, to show that these limbs are forbidden afterwards. What does the other one do with the word Gzeira? So here's 3 pshatim here, all in a brisa. Gzeira could mean sharp, to show that the cliff should be a sharp cliff, not a gently sloping mountain. Gzeira also comes from the word gazer, to rip up, to tear it up, that it was torn limb from limb. And Gzeira could also mean that this is a decree. Hashem says, this is my decree. Don't think that you don't know, that you should understand it. Don't wonder at why I'm saying this. This is my mitzvah. You don't understand it, and that's fine. You don't have to understand everything that I tell you to do. You don't have rights to question after what I say. Says the Gemara further. Rava says, I think that is logical according to the opinion that says that the limbs are mutter. Because if not, you have Isser Hana just lying out in the open, and people end up using it. The Torah does not allow Isser Hana to generally be in a place where people will stumble over them and end up using them. Okay, now we're going to discuss the meaning of the word Azazel. Gemara brings a brisa. It's a mixture of the word Az and El. Az meaning strong, and El meaning hard. It's a strong, hard cliff. Says the Gemara, maybe you'll think it's allowed to be inside a settled area. The Gemara says, no, but midbar, it has to be out in the field. How do you know it has to be a cliff and not just something strong and hard? From the word Gzeira, Gzeira meaning sharp, it should be a sharp cliff. Another brisa that says Azazel is the hardest of the mountains. It means Az of the Ale. El means a mountain, like it says, V'se'eli aras lakach, a pasuk in Yecheskel. Okay, going further, the Gemara brings another explanation. Gemara says a brisa of Rabbi Yishmael says Azazel is from the names Uzzah and Azael. Uzzah and Azael were 2 malachim, the Nephilim, who came down and ended up doing a lot of averos, of zima, of the flesh. So the Gemara says that this Azazel brings atonement for such type of averos that they did and that others did after them. Now the Gemara quotes a brisa that explains the different types of mitzvahs that there are, and this is including those that we don't understand. So the brisa says we have as mishpatai ta'asu. Mishpatai refers to things that even if the Torah wouldn't tell you to do them, you should do them anyway, like avoiding avodah zarah, avoiding sexual immorality, avoiding murder, stealing, and cursing of the name. All these things are mishpatai. Chukoisai is things that the Satan finds excuses to start making openings and saying, what is the meaning of this? You don't understand this, and can find ways to trip up Klal Yisrael, such as, the Brisa gives examples, the Isser to eat a pig, the Isser to wear shatnez, the mitzvah of doing chalitza on a yavama, taking off the shoe to release her, purification process of a mitzvah, which is complex and has many interesting halachos, and the Sar Mishtalech, the goat which is sent off the cliff. Says the Brisa, maybe you'll think that it's an empty thing. Hashem just said to do it. Hashem says, Chuka chakakti, and chavashos l'hara achareh, ani Hashem chakaktiv. You don't have a right, I have my reasons, you don't have a right to understand it, or try to understand it. Okay, now the Gemara goes into the question of when does the person who brings it, when does he become tamei and have tumas begadim? So we'd see in our Mishnah B'nai Machokas whether it's when he leaves Yerushalayim or when he pushes it off the cliff. The Gemara quotes a brisa with those 2 opinions, plus another one. The brisa also gives the sources. What does the brisa say? We call him HaMishaleach. The Torah says, the Mishaleach, v'HaMishaleach is a Seir L'Azazel, Yichavis Begad of Rachad is B'sar B'mayim. The HaMishaleach, the one who sends him, he is the one who becomes Tameh. So it says, v'HaMishaleach, he becomes Tameh, and not those who are walking with him, not the ones who are sending him. The one who sends the goat off the cliff becomes Tameh, not those who send him on his way. Now, says the brisa further, when exactly does he become Tameh? So you might think as soon as he leaves the Hazara, he's already a Mishalech. So it says, no, HaMishalech. He has to be he only becomes Tameh after some travel has already happened, some sending away has already happened. So you might think then that it's only when he gets all the way to the cliff, where he's mishalech throughout the entire midbar, that is when he becomes tamei. But for that we have viha mishalech to include earlier. What did we end up with? When he leaves Yerushalayim, that is when he becomes Tamei. This is all Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Rabbi Yossi says, the pasuk says, Azazel v'kibes. When it describes it, it says, Seir la'azazel yichabes. So it's only when he gets to Azazel, when he gets to the cliff, that is when he becomes Tamei. That's when he has to do the cleansing of his clothing. Rav Shimon says not only when he gets to Azazel, he has to actually be when he actually sends it off the cliff. Once he pushes it off the cliff, that is when he's Tamei begotten. Okay, this takes us to our next Mishnah, which discusses what happens with the carcasses of the already slaughtered par and sire that were part of the avoda up till now. So we know that they have to be burned. The Torah specifically says they have to be burned outside the machaneh. So the Mishnah describes what happens with them. The Kohen Gadol cut them open. He made a slit in the abdomen, and he pulled out the parts that go on the mizbeach. He put them in a special tray, and he put them on the mizbeach. The Gemara says here, put them on the mizbeach. He put them on the mizbeach. He can't put them on the mizbeach until after he reads the parsha and changes into the big days of the golden clothing. So the Gemara says, doesn't mean he put them on the mizbeach. It means that he put them in the tray in order that they should be ready to go on the mizbeach, which was done later. But going back to the Mishnah says that then the carcasses were put on two long poles to hold them up, and the Kohanim took them out to the base of Sreifa, the burning place, which is outside the camp. Those who brought them out also became Tamei, and their clothing became Tamei. When did they become Tamei? The Mishnah says, again, Machogas, Tanakama says from when they left the Azara, and Reb Shimon says from when the fire consumed the majority of these carcasses. Okay, the Gemara describes that they were like twined, kimin kliya. That's how they were on these ropes, on these sticks. They were intertwined with each other. Says the Gemara now, a brisa, they were not cut up and skinned. They were cut up in a way like the olah was cut up, but it was cut up with the skin on them. The olah, carbon olah, was cut up. Its parts were cut up before it was burned on the mizbeach, but it was skinned first. These two were not skinned. They were cut up like the olah, but they were not skinned. How do you know this? It's a brisa that links this avoda to the avoda of the par Kohen Mashiach, who did an avera based on his own psak, and he has to bring a similar par, one of the chatas apnimi. And over there it says or ubasar uperesh, and here it describes or ubasar uperesh. The pasuk says ves or hapor v'skol basari al roshi al karav v'kirbay ufirshay or bas and perish, skin, meat, and the intestinal waste. So it mentions all three, links it to that carbon, and therefore it's the same as that carbon where it's cut up and not skinned. The Gemara says, where do you see over there that it's cut up and not skinned? So Gemara says, well, we have a link. It says roshi al karav there, just like it says by carbon to teach me that it's cut up. But it says kirbay upirshay, that the intestines and the contents of the intestines are together. You don't separate them. And we have a link between that and the ar and the basar, just like you don't separate the contents from the intestines, you don't separate the meat from the skin. You keep them together. And that's how you know that they have to be kept together. That's linked to a hekesh, to the Kohen's par and sire on Yom Kippur, and that's
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.